Well, a preseason darling for a lot of folks is the Clemson Tigers. We're going to talk about them. How tough is their schedule? Can they navigate through it? Get back to the playoff and potentially compete for a national championship. I am Colin Bashnigal, your host here at Bash the CFB Show. You can find me over on TikTok if you just look that up right down there. Make sure you like the video if you like the video and subscribe for more college football content as we keep on pumping these previews out ahead of the college football season. Let's jump into the Clemson Tigers 2025 preview. All right, so looking back at last year, what Clemson was able to do, it was an interesting year for sure. Felt like a disappointment all year, but yet they only lost one ACC game. They went 0-2 in the regular season against the SEC, losing bookends against Georgia in the first game, got blown out, and then losing to South Carolina, which South Carolina probably just ran for about 1,000 yards in that game. A little dramatic, of course. And then, of course, their one loss, like Louisville, diced their defense up a little bit. So in comes Tom Allen, because clearly Wes Goodwin and the good old boys that Dabo Swinney had hired, it wasn't working. And they end up going 0-3 against the SEC, closing out the season with a loss against Texas. But this Clemson roster this year just returns a lot of talent, returns a lot of production, and people are very, very excited about this. Now, we're looking at Cade Klubnik. He took a jump last year. He looked better at the end of the season than he did in that first game against Georgia, and it wasn't even close. He looked like a completely different player, and the perspective on Cade Klubnik changed between what he was looked at as at the end of September versus the end of December. This guy definitely leveled up his game a little bit. And I think Cade Klubnik is one of the top quarterbacks in America for sure. And I think he's going to be a high prospect in the NFL draft. TJ Moore, as a true freshman, definitely showed a lot, and so does Bryant Wesco. So I think both of those guys are going to be really good super sophomores, is what we'll call them, at the wide receiver position. They also have Antonio Williams back, who I've been pretty high on. Like, I think he could be a really good player. I called him a breakout player before, I believe it was the 2022 season, not 23 season. 22 season would have been his freshman year. No, in the 23 season, I thought he could have been a breakout player. Cole Turner also proved to be a really good player. And then Tristan Smith, a transfer. Yeah, that's right. Dabo Swinney added a transfer. Solid player from Incarnate Word. Tyler Brown. They have depth at wide receiver for sure. They're also going to have Olsen, Pat Henry at the tight end spot. Pretty solid tight end to have. Now, I'm not sure if he's going to be as good as Jake Brenningstool, but still pretty solid to have right there. At the running back position, how good are they going to be? I'm not fully positive. I mean, you got Jay Haynes. Losing Phil Maffa definitely hurt. Like, you saw their depth tested when Phil Maffa got banged up last year. I didn't think it was that great, but they have Jay Haynes going into year 3. He's ready to take a leap. And then also this Clemson Tigers coaching staff is very high on the true freshman, Gideon Davidson. So we'll see how he's able to ball out, as he is projected or thought to be maybe the starter day one as a true freshman. And running back, by the way, true freshmen have played really good at the running back spot. So this is not going to be me saying that just because he's a true freshman doesn't mean he couldn't be really good. We've seen it before. Then when you look at the offensive line, I like the left tackle, Tristan Lee. Outside of that, like, I know there's a lot of experience, but I am holding back. Look, both their tackles with Blake Miller and Tristan Lee, I think, are pretty solid. But the interior of the offensive line is just a little bit of concern to me. Again, not experience, just simply top-end ability, top-end talent. We're going to have to see how that plays out. That's my biggest concern about this offense, and something that could hold that run game back and make this Clemson team very one-dimensional. Now on the defensive side of the ball, we know what they have on the defensive line. TJ Parker, Peter Woods. Those two guys are both projected to be top 20 picks at the very least. And then they also brought in Will Hill coming in from Purdue, a really solid edge rusher over there as well. At the linebacker position, I mean, they are set. True sophomore freak athlete, a kid that I wanted to go to Ohio State in Sammy Brown. And then you have Wade Woodaz, experienced, very good when it comes to just being an experienced player that knows the defense, or at least will learn the defense, knows football, played a lot of football. It's a new defense, of course, with Tom Allen coming in. And then in the secondary, I don't know how good the secondary is going to be. This is my biggest concern about the defense, right? I think Avion Terrell is a solid player, but I definitely think he's elevated being AJ Terrell's younger brother. I don't think he's as good as AJ was. And I'm kind of worried that just because he's got that last name Terrell, it means that he's going to be just an absolute freak show. I haven't been overly impressed with him. I think he's a solid player, nothing crazy. And I'm also curious to see what Ashton Hampton looks like, the true sophomore starting on the other corner side. It's a little bit of a question mark for me. Ricardo Jones out at safety is a question mark for me. I think the nickelback, Khalil Barnes, I think that'll be all right. I'm not too worried about it. And I do think Kylan Griffin is a really good player at the safety spot for what it's worth. So it's not all bad with the Clemson secondary, but is it going to be elite enough to win a national championship? You are talking about the O-line potentially being a concern, and you're talking about the secondary being a concern. When you are playing against NFL caliber quarterbacks deep into the season, and when you're going to have to figure out how to run the ball to win games, especially with leads in the fourth quarter, those are two concerns that I have that could potentially keep Clemson away from the national championship. But what's their path to the playoff? Because we're not talking about the postseason. We're just simply talking about regular season predictions. Well, right off the bat, they're going to play LSU. And these are two teams that are getting hyped up, a lot of returning production, a lot of talent on both of these teams. This is going to be a huge game, in my opinion, specifically for Clemson, because I think they need to show that they can beat an LSU team, an SEC team that's going to be towards the top of the conference. So we expect, because last year just going 0-3 against Georgia, South Carolina, Texas, all three teams that finished towards the top of the conference. But what does it matter? What does it matter if you lose those games? And the Texas game was somewhat competitive. South Carolina went down to the wire and they got blown out against Georgia. They're going to have to open up the season a lot better. And I do worry a little bit about a couple of things with this Clemson team. What is this offense going to look like? It's a back and forth when you listen to Dabo talk about this on, all right, Garrett Riley, Lincoln Riley's little brother. Garrett Riley is a really smart offensive play caller, and he has a very good scheme to go with it. But the problem is it seems like Dabo Swinney doesn't want Garrett Riley to run what he wants to run on the offensive side of the ball. I think he let his guard down a little bit, or maybe just let him loose a little bit later in the year, especially in that Texas game. But this offense still had some downs later in the year too, like that South Carolina game. I get they had a very, very talented defense. That was ugly. That was just ugly on offense. They need to avoid that. And on defense, like hopefully Tom Allen can level up this defense, because they at times last year really did struggle. Against Louisville, they struggled. Against Texas, they really struggled, and they couldn't stop the run. They couldn't stop a nosebleed against South Carolina. Now, when we continue to move on towards the schedule, you really look at the SEC schedule, because the other three non-conference games for them, Troy, Furman, I'm missing one. Who's the other non-conference game? I'm drawing a blank here. Oh, LSU and South Carolina. That's right. Sorry about that. A little bit of a brain fart. That rivalry week out of conference game can sometimes trip me up. It almost did in the last video when we talked about an SEC team in Georgia. So anyway, continuing on. Georgia Tech, that's going to be a really tough road trip to Bobby Dodd, straight up. Like, you're not going to get much of a break from LSU going straight over to Georgia Tech in a huge contrast in styles offensively. It's going to be very interesting to see. Then you have back-to-back road games after a bye. You play Syracuse at home. Back-to-back road games is pretty tough. I don't think that those teams should be able to beat Clemson, but the back-to-back road trip makes it easier. They get 3 straight home games with a bye sandwich there, so they have basically a month stretch where they do not have to leave their hometown, which is big time. So a good time to really get into a rhythm, and if they really want to make a postseason push, it's going to happen in that 3-game stretch against SMU and Duke, who are both really solid teams, and then Florida State, who's a big mystery. Just you don't know what they're going to look like. They got to go to Louisville. And if that secondary is not corrected, I believe Jeff Brom is going to be able to do the same exact thing if that secondary is not playing much better in mid-November. Furman before South Carolina, they're looking for revenge in that rivalry game. Enough chatter. We're going to move on to the Clemson schedule predictions. We're going to start by giving them those couple of victories against Troy and Furman. Troy, I'm not going to trust them with what they have. Like, first off, Jared Parker is just not a head coach that I'm going to trust in, and Furman has no shot. Like, come on. All right, LSU, week 1. I did the LSU preview, so you know if you watch that video, you know where I lean in this. And it's been back and forth for me all offseason, but I think the big difference is if your weakness is potentially the secondary on the defensive side of the ball. I get LSU has a little bit of questions to answer on the offensive line and pass protection, but with the receiver talent and the ability to create after the catch that some of those guys have, I think LSU could be a little bit of a mismatch in week 1. Not to mention, if this LSU defense is improved, and they're going to be improved off the bat, I think that this Blake Baker defense could present some problems to Cade Klubnik. So I'm going to take LSU to win that game. Then you get a contrast in styles. Georgia Tech. Now, Georgia Tech runs the ball a lot. So you would think leaning on those linebackers and the defensive line, that's going to help. Here's the problem with that, right? And we saw it in the Georgia game. This puts so much stress on the edge rushers and neutralizes the edge rushers. Even with athletic linebackers, you got to be on the same page on every snap, basically reading each other's mind on what read the defensive end's making if you're a linebacker. So I know Sammy Brown's a freak athlete. I know Wade Woodaz has played a lot of football, but Georgia had those same freaks last year and should have lost. And I think this Georgia Tech defense should still be pretty solid. They're an annoying offense to play, to say the least. I don't think that Dabo Swinney is going to let his team look ahead to that game, but I definitely think that's going to be a game where Clemson could come in with an ego like, who are these guys? Like, I don't really care about Georgia Tech, and Georgia Tech clips them. I think that Clemson starts 1-2 with 2 potentially of their hardest 3 games, maybe 4 games in the first 3 games. So that's a little bit bold. It's contrast in styles from LSU, and I have them losing both. But I am worried about the amount of stress that Georgia Tech can put on that defensive line and the linebackers. I think they can put a lot of stress in there, and I think a lot of mistakes could potentially happen, and Clemson sleepwalks through that game, giving Georgia Tech an opportunity to swoop in and steal a W. Close, very close. Syracuse, they're going to air the ball out. Again, this is another team, but in September, do I trust Stephen Jelly to be able to do that? I don't, especially at Clemson. I'm going to take Syracuse or Clemson to win against Syracuse to go 2-2. Off the bye, they play at North Carolina. They get a week to prepare for whatever Bill Belichick has, but they got a month of film before that. Of course, I'm pretty sure North Carolina has a bye week too, so a little bit less film, I guess, but they're going to have 2 weeks to be able to study the film. They're going to be less of a mystery by this point. I trust that this coaching staff with an extra week to prepare is going to be ready for North Carolina. Boston College is definitely going to be an interesting game. I think that's a dangerous trip anytime that these top teams go to a solid Boston College team. And I think this Boston College team, even if I predicted their record and I did do their video, even if I predicted it to be a little bit worse than you would think for a solid Boston College team, still a dangerous team. I think Clemson wins, but it's going to be a tough, gritty victory. SMU, they return back home. I think they're going to be very happy to get a home game. It's 3 weeks at this point since they had a home game. So, yeah, the fans are going to be a little bit rowdy for this. It's an ACC championship rematch, but I don't also trust that SMU is going to be able to have that same top end ability. Not to mention, I do think the ACC is just going to be tougher. So SMU, to me, is going to be going through a little bit more of a gauntlet to this point in the season than they did a year ago. So I got Clemson winning that game. So they've flipped it around. They've won 4 straight conference games after losing a second game. Do they continue it out off the bye week? Duke is pretty tough. Manny Diaz, that defense is going to throw a lot at this Cade Klubnik ran offense. And I think the run game is not going to get going, but I think this defense will be able to shut down this Duke offense. I think a low-scoring game, Clemson guts out a victory. Florida State, they're just a mystery team to me. I don't know what to say about Florida State. Thomas Castellanos, do I have a lot of faith in him? Not really. And quite honestly, I'm running out of faith with Mike Norvell. I think that group that they had in 22 and 23 was a very special group, and the stars aligned for them to go undefeated in the regular season. I don't think they recapture the magic. If they're going to be better, they're going to be decent, but I just don't see that top end ability for Florida State. I'm taking Clemson to win relatively easily. Louisville on the road. Man, I had a hard time with this game, but I think the biggest convincing factor for me is if some of those younger guys in the secondary are going to start playing better, it's going to be now. And this is a great way to not only make up for what happened earlier in the year with LSU and potential struggles that they could have against like Syracuse or SMU. I think that they could right a lot of wrongs in this game, not just from this year, but last year too. I think Clemson will gut out a victory by a touchdown on the road at Louisville. And then finally, South Carolina, a huge revenge spot. You know, I keep going back and forth with South Carolina because they're replacing so much talent, even if Dylan Stewart comes back. They're replacing so much talent on the defensive side of the ball. Offensively, I think they're going to be all right or pretty good. But the thing is about South Carolina is like, I want to see more. I just find myself when I watch Lenora Sellers, I see these tools, I see these flashes, and I want to see more. You know, I'm an Ohio State fan, as I mentioned earlier in this video, and I usually don't talk about that too much. But I heard something in Ryan Day's press conference earlier today is there's a difference between being a player and being a pro. That's what they say. And the pro puts it together consistently, and a player shows those flashes. Well, right now, to me, Lenora Sellers is a really good player, but he is not a pro. And I think it's going to take a pro type of performance for Lenora Sellers to win, even at home. And I just don't trust that he's going to be at that level. I'm going to take Clemson to win and finish off the season ripping off 9 straight regular season wins to go 10-2. So the poor start that I am predicting for Clemson with all this offseason hype, I think it all comes to fruition later in the season. My big question, and we're going to answer this question over on the channel when we predict the playoff, is this team truly capable of competing and winning a national championship? I'm not quite sure about that right now, and I'll have that answer for you here shortly. Comment down below if I'm maybe underrating Clemson, if I'm ignoring some things with Clemson. Just let me know what you think about this team and any other teams on this schedule. Thank you guys for tuning in. I'll see you guys in the next video where we're going to talk about the Texas Tech Red Raiders, one of the most fun teams to follow this offseason. Till then, you guys have yourself a good and blessed rest of your day.